The hospital corridors were quiet, but not silent. Soft beeps from machines echoed, mixed with hurried footsteps of nurses and muffled cries from families waiting for news. In one corner of the pediatric ward, a small boy sat alone by the window. His thin frame, pale skin, and tired eyes told a story of pain far deeper than his young age should ever know. Sweeney had been there for a charity visit, planning to meet children and lift their spirits with smiles and gentle words. She wasn't prepared for the sight of the boy clutching a worn-out toy car in his trembling hands. His fingers moved over the chipped paint, almost like he was holding on to a lifeline. She walked slowly toward him, her heels soft against the floor. But the boy didn't look up. His eyes were fixed outside, where the world seemed brighter than his little room. Sydney bent down and asked gently, "Hey, what's your name?" The boy finally looked at her. His voice was almost a whisper, weak yet carrying all the weight of his struggle. "Daniel," he said. Sydney smiled, though her chest tightened. "That's a strong name." But before she could say more, a nurse walked by, carrying a chart. Her hushed conversation with another nurse reached Sydney's ears. Daniel's condition was critical, and his family could barely afford the ongoing treatment. The words sank into her like ice. She had seen sadness before, but this felt different. This felt like life itself was slipping away while the world outside kept moving. Sydney sat beside Daniel, trying to hide the heaviness she felt. "You like cars?" she asked, pointing at his toy. Daniel nodded faintly. "My dad used to fix cars. He can't come here much now. He has to work." That one sentence cut through Sydney. She imagined a father torn between earning money for treatment and being at his son's side. A family breaking under weight they never asked for. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how much she could do on her own. As she sat quietly, a familiar figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, tall, with an aura of calm even in the middle of chaos. It was Keanu Reeves. He had come quietly, without media, without announcement. He had heard through a friend about children in this hospital and decided to visit, bringing not just donations but his time. He believed presence mattered more than cameras or headlines. Sydney's eyes widened in surprise as she saw him approach. Daniel looked up too, curiosity flickering across his tired face. Keanu smiled at them both, his gentle voice filling the heavy air. "Hey there, little man. I heard you're stronger than most superheroes." Daniel blinked, unsure if he should smile, but the corners of his mouth lifted just a little. Keanu crouched down, now eye level with the boy, and took a small notebook from his pocket. He opened it, revealing quick sketches of motorcycles and cars he had drawn during travels. "I'm not the best artist," he chuckled softly, "but I think you'd know if these look right." Daniel's eyes brightened for the first time, his fingers reaching to touch the sketch of a car. That's like my toy," he whispered, holding up his chipped little car. Keanu nodded. "Exactly. Maybe you can help me make these sketches better. I need an expert like you." Sydney watched silently, her throat tight. She had seen acts of kindness before, but this was different. There was no performance here, no cameras, just Keanu kneeling in front of a sick child, making him feel important when the world had pushed him aside. For a moment, the machines, the whispers, the fear, they all faded. Daniel's fragile smile became the strongest light in that room. Sydney felt her heart ache and heal at the same time. She realized something powerful in that moment. Kindness didn't need grand gestures. Sometimes it was as simple as sitting down, listening, and reminding someone they mattered. But deep inside, a question began to grow. What would happen when this visit ended? What would happen to Daniel's fight when the kindness of a day faded into tomorrow's struggle? That unanswered question hanging in the silence was the beginning of something that would soon change everything, for Sydney, for Keanu, and for Daniel's fragile little world. The night after Keanu's quiet visit, the hospital seemed different. The nurses still rushed, machines still beeped, and worried families still whispered in hallways. But somewhere in that building, a seed of hope had been planted. Daniel had smiled, just once. But it was enough for Sydney to carry that image with her long after she left. She sat in her car outside the hospital, staring at the steering wheel as rain tapped gently against the windshield. She kept replaying the moment Keanu knelt beside Daniel, the way his gentle voice lifted the boy's spirit for even a few minutes. Sydney whispered to herself, "Why does it take strangers to remind the world to care?" Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend who worked in the hospital. Daniel had a tough night. The doctor said he needs more tests soon, but his father can't afford them. Sydney felt a knot in her chest. She thought about all the scripts, photo shoots, and events waiting for her, and suddenly they all felt meaningless compared to the little boy clutching his toy car. The next morning, she walked back into the hospital, determined but uncertain. She carried books, small puzzles, and crayons, simple things that might give children a distraction from their pain. But her real purpose was to see Daniel again. When she entered his room, he was lying quietly, his toy car still in hand. His father, a man with tired eyes and calloused hands, sat in the corner. He looked up at Sydney, unsure of who she was, but grateful when she greeted him with warmth. "I just wanted to check on Daniel," she said softly. His father nodded. "Thank you. Not many people come." Those words carried sadness deeper than any she had heard. She sat near Daniel and pulled out a coloring book. "I brought something for you. Maybe you can color while I mess up the puzzles." Daniel's lips curved slightly. "You're not good at puzzles." Sydney laughed lightly. "Terrible. You'll have to help me." As they began, Sydney noticed the father watching, his hands fidgeting. She asked gently, "How are you holding up?" He sighed, looking at the floor. "I work 2 jobs now. Nights at the garage, mornings delivering packages. I try to pay for the medicines, but it's never enough. I wish I could be here more. I wish he didn't have to face this alone so often." Sydney's heart broke hearing his quiet confession. She wanted to promise help, but before she could, the door opened. Keanu stepped in again, this time carrying a bag. He smiled at the boy first, then at Sydney, as if recognizing the same pull that had brought them back. "I thought maybe we could try something," Keanu said, pulling out a small set of model car pieces. "Daniel, if you're up for it, we could build this together." Daniel's eyes lit up, his weak hands reaching eagerly. "Really? Really?" Keanu nodded, kneeling beside him. Sydney watched in awe. Keanu wasn't just visiting. He was investing his time, his patience, and his heart. He guided Daniel's tiny hands, encouraging him with every small step. The father whispered to Sydney, "Why would someone like him, someone famous, do this?" Sydney turned, her eyes misty. "Because kindness doesn't need a reason." For the next hour, the room transformed. The beeping of machines faded into the background as laughter and soft conversation filled the air. Keanu celebrated every little victory as Daniel fit pieces together, and Sydney cheered along, pretending to be the assistant mechanic. But beneath the smiles, tension lingered. Sydney noticed the nurse enter twice, checking the chart with a troubled look. Finally, as Keanu helped Daniel place the last piece, the nurse pulled the father aside. Her voice was low, but Sydney could still hear fragments. "The treatment. Costs urgent." Without it, the father's face collapsed under the weight of her words. His shoulders slumped as though carrying the whole world. Sydney froze. Keanu noticed, too, his kind smile fading into quiet concern. He placed a gentle hand on the father's shoulder and said softly, "You don't have to carry this alone." The father shook his head, eyes brimming. "You don't understand. It's not just about money, it's about time. Every minute I spend working to pay for this is a minute I lose with him. And I don't know which is worse, missing his days or not being able to save his tomorrows." The words hung heavy in the room, cutting into everyone's heart. Daniel looked up, sensing the sadness, even though no one wanted him to. Sydney leaned forward, her voice trembling. "We'll find a way, I promise. Daniel won't fight this alone anymore." Keanu met her eyes, and without words, they shared the same thought. This wasn't just about one visit or one act of kindness. This was about rewriting the story for a boy whose world was shrinking too fast. Outside the window, rain clouds began to gather, casting a shadow over the hospital. Inside, 3 strangers stood silently, united by one fragile promise. None of them knew that what they were about to face would test not only their kindness, but their strength, their faith, and their very definition of hope. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, the storm in Daniel's life grew darker, pulling them all into a journey none of them had expected. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside the hospital. As thunder rolled across the sky, Daniel's condition began to shift in subtle but worrying ways. His cough grew harsher, his breath shorter, and the doctors spoke in urgent whispers that carried dread into the air. Sidney sat at his bedside, gripping his small hand while Keanu stood near the window, his tall frame tense against the flickering light of lightning. The father paced in the corner, torn between hope and despair. Suddenly, Daniel whispered, his voice fragile but clear, "I don't want to sleep yet. If I sleep, will I wake up?" The question sliced through the room. Sidney's eyes filled instantly with tears, but she forced a smile. "Of course you will. You're stronger than this storm. Storms always pass." Keanu crouched down beside him, his tone calm yet filled with quiet strength. "Do you know what I do when I'm scared at night?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I close my eyes and imagine building something. Maybe a motorcycle, maybe a car, sometimes even just a puzzle. Every piece I add makes me stronger. And by the time I open my eyes, the fear feels smaller." Daniel thought about it for a moment, then whispered, "Can you build it with me? In my dreams?" Keanu smiled softly. "I promise." Sidney's heart trembled at the gentle exchange. She had worked with actors, directors, crowds, and fans, but she had never seen such genuine kindness so quietly given. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple, raw, and deeply human. Just then, the doctor entered, his face heavy with urgency. "We need to prepare him for the next stage of treatment. Without it, he may not make it through the week." The father's knees buckled as he lowered himself into a chair. His hands covered his face, muffling his broken words. "I don't have it." "I can't." Sidney leaned forward. "How much?" The doctor hesitated. "It's a significant amount. Tens of thousands. And it has to be arranged quickly." Sidney swallowed hard. She had money, more than enough to help. But she also knew throwing money at the problem wasn't the answer alone. This was about more than bills. This was about giving Daniel dignity, his family peace, and making sure the fight wasn't wasted. Keanu placed a steadying hand on the father's shoulder. "Let us help, please. You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore." The father looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Why would you? You don't even know us." Keanu's reply was soft, almost a whisper. "Because I know what it feels like to lose someone and wish I had done more. I can't undo my past, but I can stand with you now." The room fell into silence. The father's tears finally fell, not of weakness, but of release. He nodded slowly, his pride bending under the weight of love for his son. That night, while Daniel rested, Sidney and Keanu stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above them as they leaned against the cold walls. "I want to do something bigger," Sidney said suddenly, her voice trembling. "Not just pay his bills, not just for Daniel, for all the children here. They deserve more than waiting for miracles." Keanu studied her for a moment. His eyes were tired yet full of fire. "Then let's start now." "Not tomorrow, not next month. Tonight," Sidney hesitated. "But what can we do in one night?" Keanu's lips curved into the faintest smile. Sometimes one night can change everything. They walked into the hospital lobby, where parents huddled on benches, some asleep, some praying, some staring blankly at the floor. The air was heavy with unspoken fears. Sidney approached a mother holding a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. "How long have you been here?" she asked gently. The woman looked up, her eyes hollow. 3 days. "Waiting for a bed." Sidney's heart cracked again. She turned to Keanu. "We can't just walk away." "Not anymore," Keanu nodded. "Then we won't." They spent the night moving from room to room, not with cameras, not with announcements, just two people quietly listening, holding hands and whispering encouragement. Sometimes they offered blankets, sometimes snacks from vending machines, sometimes just a hug. But with every step, hope began to flicker in places where it had long been extinguished. Sidney sat with a little girl who had lost her hair from treatment. The girl shyly asked, "Do you think I'm still pretty?" Sidney's voice broke as she replied, You are more beautiful than anyone I know." Keanu sat with a boy who couldn't walk anymore, listening to him explain how he once dreamed of becoming a football player. Keanu didn't interrupt, he just listened, making the boy feel like his dreams still mattered. By dawn, exhaustion weighed on them. But so did something else, a sense of purpose neither had expected. As the sun rose, lighting the pale walls of the hospital with a golden glow, Sydney whispered to Keanu, "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" Keanu looked at her, his quiet gaze steady. "Yes, because kindness isn't about moments. It's about what you do after the moment has passed." But neither of them knew that their simple acts that night would soon spread beyond the hospital walls, catching attention they never sought, and pulling them into a wave far greater than they had ever imagined. And in the middle of it all, Daniel's fragile fight would become the symbol of something much larger than any of them could see. The morning after their long night in the hospital, Sydney and Keanu stepped out into the crisp air. The storm had passed, leaving behind streets washed clean by rain. But inside them, the storm still lingered. Neither could shake the voices of the children, the broken stories of parents who had given up everything, the silent weight of watching a child fight for breath. Sydney leaned against her car, her eyes distant. "Keanu, how do we walk away from this? How do we go back to our lives knowing what we've seen?" Keanu paused, his gaze steady. "We don't walk away. We carry it with us. And we do something with it." His words echoed in her chest. She realized he wasn't speaking as an actor or as a celebrity. He was speaking as a man who had known loss, who understood that some battles are too heavy for one family to fight alone. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was the same nurse who had whispered about Daniel's treatment. The message was short. "He's getting weaker. Doctors say the next 72 hours are critical." Sydney's heart sank. She looked at Keanu, who read the message over her shoulder. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Then we move faster." "No more waiting!" They rushed back inside, finding Daniel's father sitting outside the room with his head in his hands. His exhaustion was carved into every line of his face. When he saw them, his eyes filled with shame. "I can't do this. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. And my boy, he's slipping away while I stand here useless." Keanu knelt in front of him, his voice firm but kind. "You are not useless. You're a father doing everything he can. But no one should fight this battle alone. Let us stand with you," Sydney added softly. "This is not just your fight anymore. It's ours too." Inside the room, Daniel lay pale and fragile, his small hand resting on the toy car as if it were his anchor to the world. Sydney brushed his hair gently and whispered, "We're here. We're not leaving you." That night, Keanu made a quiet call to a trusted friend, a doctor who worked with global charities. No headlines, no media. Within hours, a team of specialists agreed to review Daniel's case. But the challenge was larger than one child. The hospital itself was underfunded, with outdated machines and overworked staff. Sydney's mind spun as she watched the chaos of the ward. "Keanu, what if we start something here? Something bigger? We can't fix everything, but maybe we can light a spark." Keanu nodded slowly. "A spark can become a fire, but we have to be ready for what follows." The next day, while Sydney sat with Daniel, humming softly as he drifted in and out of sleep, Keanu visited the hospital director. He didn't go as a celebrity demanding attention. He went as a quiet man, asking questions. How many children were waiting for treatment? How many families had walked away because they couldn't pay? How many had lost their loved ones in silence? The answers broke him. By the time he returned to the ward, Sydney saw the weight in his eyes. "It's worse than we thought, isn't it?" she asked. He nodded. "But it means what we're doing here matters even more." Meanwhile, Daniel's condition shifted suddenly. Alarms beeped, nurses rushed in, and his father clung to the doorway, frozen in fear. Sydney's heart pounded as she whispered prayers under her breath. Keanu stood behind the father, holding him steady, his calm presence anchoring the man who was about to collapse. After what felt like an eternity, the machine steadied again. Daniel was stable for now, but the doctor's words were clear. Without advanced treatment, they were running out of time. That night, Sydney sat in the hospital chapel, the faint light of candles flickering against her tired face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Why him? Why any of them? How do you explain suffering this big to a child?" A hand touched her shoulder. It was Keanu. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat beside her in silence. Then, in a voice so soft it felt like a confession, he said, "When I lost someone I loved, I asked the same question, and I never found the answer. But I learned this. When you can't explain suffering, you can still answer it with love." Sydney's eyes filled with tears. She realized that was their only choice, to fight suffering with love, again and again, even if it wasn't enough to change the whole world. But outside the hospital walls, whispers were starting to spread. Someone had seen them moving from room to room, sitting with families, quietly paying bills. Stories of their kindness leaked online, growing faster than either of them expected. Reporters began circling, hungry for headlines. Some painted them as heroes, others accused them of chasing publicity. Sydney worried that attention might distract from what mattered most: Daniel's fight for life. As dawn broke, she looked out the window and whispered to Keanu, "What if the world twists this into something we never meant?" Keanu's reply was steady. "Then we keep our eyes on Daniel. We don't do this for applause. We do it because it's right." Yet deep inside, both of them knew the days ahead would not be simple. The media storm was coming. People would question, doubt, even criticize. But in that quiet hospital ward, as Daniel clutched his toy car in fragile sleep, the only truth that mattered was this: they could not walk away. And in the middle of uncertainty, one fragile boy had become the center of a movement neither Sydney nor Keanu had planned for. But both were now bound to protect, no matter the cost. The hospital corridors buzzed louder than usual the next morning. It wasn't just the hum of machines or the hurried steps of nurses. There was something else. Whispers, rumors, fragments of conversation floated from one waiting parent to another. "They say Keanu Reeves was here all night. I heard Sweeney paid for a treatment yesterday. Is it true? Or just another story people tell to pass time?" Sydney felt the shift the moment she entered. Heads turned, eyes followed, and voices hushed as she walked past. She wasn't used to this kind of attention here. This was no red carpet, no premiere. It was raw, unfiltered, and heavy with expectation. She stepped into Daniel's room, her heart tightening. He looked weaker, his little chest rising and falling like a fragile bird trying to fly against the wind. His toy car rested on his pillow, the paint chipped further, a symbol of resilience that was breaking too. His father sat by his side, hands clasped tightly as if holding invisible ropes to keep his son tethered to the world. When he saw Sydney, he tried to smile but failed. "The doctor says we need to make decisions soon. They can't wait much longer." Before Sydney could answer, Keanu walked in, his calm presence filling the room. He carried a thermos of tea and a bag of sandwiches, offering them first to the father. "Eat something. You'll need your strength." The father shook his head. "I can't. How can I eat when my boy is—" Keanu interrupted gently. "Because he needs you standing, not collapsing. Love isn't just worry. It's being strong enough to keep holding his hand when he's afraid." The father's eyes watered, but he nodded, accepting the food with trembling hands. As the hours passed, the media storm outside grew. Vans lined up near the hospital gates, reporters trying to catch glimpses through the glass doors. Families who had once sat quietly now looked at Sydney and Keanu with desperate hope, some asking for help, others simply saying thank you. Sydney felt the weight pressing down. She leaned toward Keanu in the hallway. "This isn't what we came for. Daniel doesn't need a spotlight. He needs peace." Keanu nodded slowly. "But maybe the spotlight can do something good. Maybe if the world sees, others will step forward." Their conversation was cut short by alarms blaring from Daniel's room. They rushed back in to find nurses surrounding him, adjusting machines, calling out vitals. Sydney froze in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel's small voice broke through the chaos. "Dad, don't let go!" His father grabbed his hand, sobbing. "I'm here, son. I'm not going anywhere." Sydney's eyes blurred with tears as Keanu placed a steady hand on the father's back, grounding him through the storm. After tense minutes that felt like hours, The machines steadied and the doctor exhaled. "He's stable again, but this is temporary. He needs the advanced treatment now." Silence filled the room. The father looked broken. Sydney felt helpless, and Keanu's calm cracked just enough to reveal the pain beneath. Finally, Keanu spoke. "Then we don't wait. We'll cover it. Every cost, every detail. No delays." The father stared at him, stunned. "Why? Why would you do this?" Keanu's voice was steady, but his eyes revealed scars from long ago. "Because no child should lose their fight because of money. Because I know what it's like to wish for one more day and not get it. And because kindness only matters if it's acted on when it's hardest." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Daniel's shallow breathing. Sydney wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "And I'll make sure this isn't just about Daniel. We'll start something bigger, something that helps all these children. No one should stand alone in these halls." The father broke down then, tears spilling freely, not just from grief, but from the shock of being seen, of not carrying the weight alone anymore. Later that evening, while Daniel slept, Sydney stepped outside the hospital entrance. Reporters swarmed instantly, microphones flashing, voices shouting questions. "Are you and Keanu paying for children's treatments? Is this a publicity stunt? What's your plan for Daniel?" Sydney raised her hand, silencing them. Her voice was calm but firm. "We didn't come here for headlines. We came here because one child needed us, and when we saw more children waiting, we realized we couldn't walk away. This isn't about us. It's about them, about every family sitting in fear, praying for help. If you want a story, write that." The crowd fell silent, stunned by her honesty. When she returned inside, Keanu was sitting quietly by Daniel's bed, sketching again in his notebook. This time, Daniel's toy car was drawn in perfect detail, with wings added on the sides. Keanu looked up at Sydney and whispered, "He said he wants it to fly, so I'm making it fly." Sydney's heart broke and healed all at once. She realized then that even if the world doubted them, even if storms of criticism came, they had already won something powerful. They had given a child belief, a family strength, and a hospital a reason to hope. But as the night grew darker, a new fear stirred in her chest. She knew promises were easy to make in the heat of emotion. The real test would come tomorrow, when the bills, the decisions, and the pressure of the world demanded more than just kind words, and tomorrow was coming faster than any of them were ready for. The hospital felt like a battlefield in slow motion. Every beep from a machine was a warning shot. Every hurried step from a nurse another sign that time was slipping through their fingers. Daniel's tiny chest rose and fell, each breath fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. Sydney sat at his bedside, whispering soft stories about adventures in faraway lands, trying to keep his mind from drifting into fear. His father clung to her words too, his tired eyes searching for hope in every sentence. Keanu stood by the window, watching dawn break. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the pale walls, and for a moment he closed his eyes, remembering the people he had lost in his own life. He had promised himself years ago that if he ever had the chance to save someone else's tomorrow, he wouldn't hesitate. Today was that chance. The specialists Keanu had called finally arrived, bringing new equipment and expertise. The room filled with controlled chaos as they prepared for Daniel's treatment. Syringes clicked, machines beeped, and instructions were passed quickly, every second heavy with tension. Before they began, Daniel tugged on his father's sleeve. His voice was weak but steady. "Dad, don't be scared." "I'm not scared if you're here." Tears spilled down the father's face as he kissed his son's forehead. "I'm right here, buddy. Always." Keanu stepped closer, holding out the sketchbook with the flying car drawn inside. "Remember this? You said you wanted your car to fly. I believe you'll fly with it. This treatment, it's your wings." Daniel smiled faintly, clutching the drawing as if it were a promise he could hold. The procedure began. Sydney held her breath as doctors worked swiftly, their hands moving with practiced precision. Minutes dragged into hours, the weight of silence pressing on everyone waiting outside the room. Finally, the door opened. The lead doctor's face was tired, but there was a glimmer of relief. He made it through. It's not the end of the journey, but today, Today he fought hard and he won. The father collapsed into Keanu's arms, sobbing with gratitude. Sydney leaned against the wall, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." When they entered the room, Daniel was asleep, his small chest rising more steadily now. The toy car rested beside him, and the sketch of wings lay on the nightstand. His fight was not over, but for the first time in weeks there was hope. Word of what had happened spread quickly, not from reporters chasing headlines, but from families who had witnessed the kindness firsthand. Parents spoke of how Sydney had sat with their children, how Keanu had paid for medicines quietly, how they both treated strangers like family. In the days that followed, donations began pouring into the hospital from around the world. People inspired by the story sent what they could. Some gave large amounts, others just a few dollars. But together, it was enough to transform the pediatric ward. New machines were ordered, treatments expanded, and no child was turned away for lack of money again. Sydney and Keanu didn't stop at Daniel's room. They worked with the hospital to launch a foundation, one that provided emergency aid for children in need. They named it Wings for Tomorrow, inspired by Daniel's little car with wings. Weeks later, when Daniel was strong enough to sit by the window again, he looked up at Keanu and Sydney with a wide smile. "My car flies now," he said, holding up the sketch. "And so do I." The father, his voice trembling with emotion, whispered, "You didn't just save my son. You saved me too. I thought the world had forgotten us, but you proved kindness is still alive." Keanu lowered his head humbly. "We didn't save you. You saved him by never giving up. We just stood with you when you needed someone to lean on," Sydney added softly. "And now it's our job to make sure no family feels alone again." As the sun set that evening, painting the hospital walls in gold, Sydney and Keanu stood side by side, watching children play in the courtyard below. There was laughter, joy, and the kind of hope that could only grow when people chose love over indifference. For Sydney, the experience had changed everything. Fame and spotlight no longer defined her purpose. For Keanu, it had renewed his vow to live quietly but with impact, to let kindness guide his steps. And for Daniel, the boy who once feared he might not wake up, life stretched ahead like an open road. His little toy car, now a symbol of resilience and dreams that no storm could take away. In the end, it wasn't about celebrities, headlines, or even miracles. It was about a child's fragile hope, a father's unyielding love, and two strangers who chose to act when it mattered most. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.